Welcome back to The Roll-Up. Today we had the pleasure of speaking with Rushi from Movement Labs and Austin from Omni Network. We talked about their modular but integrated thesis. At first we were kind of skeptics of this thesis, and frankly it may still be. But we had the chance to ask our questions to Rushi and Austin about why they see this trend playing out, what this really means, and what people can expect from the progression of modular blockchains enshrining more parts and becoming a more integrated structure. We talked about their thesis with building their own tech stacks, what that entails, as well as what's to come for each of their respective protocols. We hope you guys enjoy this episode, and let's jump right in after a quick word from some of our amazing sponsors.
Fuel achieves higher throughput by utilizing a novel UTXO-based approach that allows for parallelized execution. This design significantly accelerates transaction processing, which enables Fuel to handle vastly more transactions than non-parallelized systems. Thanks to advancements introduced by Fuel, Ethereum rollups are set to be more powerful than ever before. And Fuel is not just enhancing Ethereum rollups, it's redefining them, making them faster, more scalable, and more adaptable to meet the needs of modern applications and developers. Go to fuel.network, that's fuel.network, to learn how to build on the Rollup OS.
Welcome back to The Roll-Up. Today we have Rushi and Austin talking about the integrated thesis as part of this broader modular thesis. We've got Rob here with the wonky Celestia shirt on, fitting for the day. Celestia is finally going up. The sentiment is down. Rob's going to consensus though, so I'm pretty sure he's excited about that.
Yeah, the euphoric conferences are definitely a little bit more fun. And I know that the collar on this shirt is a little bit too big, so I'm not sure exactly what's going on there. Maybe integrated t-shirts are a little bit more fitting.
They are more fitting. I'm going consensus too, so we have integrated day, and it's going to be much more fitting.
Nice. All right, well, you said that's at consensus?
Yeah, it's in it's in 2 days from now.
I will see you there, sir.
I actually think that we're going to post this on that day or the day before. Austin,
Nice.
Are you going or no?
No, I'm going to be ECC though.
Nice.
This is George. He is also integrated.
Nice.
Nice.
So you guys kind of started this a bit of a movement, if I'm going to call it that. I guess like the idea that we should start with is like, what's like kind of like the problem here that you guys have seen from the builder's perspective of like this idea of modularity and kind of like this convergence, I think, of this monolithic track versus this modular track, and kind of how you guys are seeing a lot of these designs come together. So yeah, let's start there and kind of expand.
Yeah, I can start. I think the issue that we ran into is like we didn't have a word for what we were. It was always just like there's a Frankenstein chain. We have like different DA layers, different VMs, different shared sequencers. When you have like 5 different modular components, when you combine them, there was nothing to call that. So they kept calling Frankenstein chains. And like even like pitch calls, they'd be like, so it's a Frankenstein kind of product. I was like, yeah, that's what it is. And eventually got to a point where I was like, I kind of don't want to call my baby a Frankenstein. I probably want to like have a better like terminology for this thing, as well as like I realized other groups also had a similar issue where they had a novel feature or leveraging existing technologies, but didn't know how to combine it. How do you combine the notion of using existing software and then bringing your new software and then kind of combining that? Celestia started this whole modular wave with the first modular blockchain. They built essentially a DA layer, or they built a blockchain designed only for DA, right? And then you had like groups like Fuel and like Espresso. Espresso's for focus on shared sequencing. Fuel's like focusing mostly on execution layer. What do you call like these different groups when you combine them? What do you call like a Fuel VM on Espresso? What do you call a Fuel VM on Celestia? And for us, like we didn't have a word for that. So this integrated thesis kind of popped up in my head where I would talk to a few folks, and it seemed like it really resonated where we could essentially bring a category like within the modular umbrella that says if you use multiple modular stacks, so my analogy is modular plus modular, that would be integrated because you're using existing parts like service providers, combine them for a use case or a specific niche. I'll say a few more thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think the key thing here is that we've ended up in this like quite messy world through people building out modular technologies. And integrated IC is kind of the logical conclusion of that, where we kind of took a bit here where we needed to optimize each different level of the infrastructure stack. And because we've been focused on separating out those individual levels, it's made things a little complex and difficult to use. But integrated IC is like a way to compose all those different pieces together into really nice user experiences while getting the like peak performance properties out of each of those layers. That to me is what integrated is really about.
Nice.
Cool.
And just on the modular and monolithic front, like for a really long time, I was of the understanding that we had this spectrum, and on one end of the spectrum was this more centralized, but higher performance component of monolithic, where that one entity is doing all of the things. On the other end of that spectrum, you have modular, where it's kind of piecemeal. But like when we think about that, like through the frame of integrated, it's no longer that modular and monolithic are really referring to the same thing. These aren't really like two different ends of the spectrum now, because monolithic is referring to an entire set of blockchain components, whereas now we're using modular as one singular component. And then so how are you kind of reconciling like what a modular like how does that kind of fit into the integrated thesis if now like modularity is referring to one of those pieces and integrated is now a bundle of those pieces all integrated and working seamlessly together?
Honestly, my take here is there's a very simple analogy in the history of software development that we can look to. And it's really what happened in Web 2. We used to ship software like once a year, and it would come like on like disks, Now we're at a world, like living in a world where every software company that uses modern practices updates their software packages like multiple times a day. But users generally don't even have a clue that is going on behind the scenes. And so from a very like simplified perspective, we can really think of modulars as like microservices, and behind the software that most of us use today, there are like hundreds of microservices being used. But you don't think, as a user, you don't think about any of those. It's just a really nice, simple experience, and it can get better consistently over time. So I don't think about it as much about in the dimension of like centralization versus not, because that's kind of a different thing you can evaluate each of these on. It's more about like optimizing each of these individual components. And I think we kind of have a historical precedent where this happened in Web 2. It just has like a very interesting software architecture, given that we're doing it in crypto now.
Yeah, I think my biggest example I point to is like car manufacturing. When Henry Ford first started Ford, obviously built it in-house, end-to-end all the parts. But then he realized like it's better to like outsource the engine, outsource the tires, outsource each part of the components. Like individual tire manufacturers or individual engine manufacturers will always do better than like a party or a labs entity that's focused on end-to-end development. So general thesis is if you can outsource, I think like Nick explains this as lazy, right? If you can be lazy with the parts of the stack that aren't important to you, like for us, like we're not focused on DA. We believe that other people can do better than us. We're not focused. We're really on a shared sequencer, but we're still using underlying technologies. Like we're lazy about like things like DA because it's not our business model, but we're really focusing on execution and developer experience because that's our bread and butter income. We're focused on day to day, right? So going back to the car example, like we're focused on, let's say, the chassis, but still outsourcing the engine, outsourcing essentially the tires to other organizations that we believe can do better. And then in terms of like UX, like I would still say it's like Solana today still has better UX from a developer point of view, or Monolithic chains still today have a better UX given they've been out for like 6-7 years, right? People forget that the whole modular thesis is 6 months old, now like 7 months old. So, and it's grown rapidly. Like the ecosystem chart, like I think you guys already posted it, is massive. Imagine when the modular thesis and the integrated thesis get 6 to 7 years, what you'll see is like the development speed of hundreds of labs entities will simply outpace a single lab entity. And then the thesis of competition comes in where because there's multiple service providers, like different DAs, different sequencers, that itself forces competition within the industry. So everyone's going to compete on like fast improving times, slower, like faster latencies. So what that enables is, like, for example, I can choose which DA layer wins. I can choose which sequencer wins, which gives me more flexibility.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty interesting point in terms of talking about consistent competition across each of these layers as well. It's hard to build like a monopolistic lock-in on a specific place here if we can just agree on standardized interfaces And that will kind of like push the entire stack to really continually optimize throughout the years that come.
And I think that we're aligned on the thesis. I think that where some of the pushback comes from is well, there's a couple things. I think the first thing to address is um, when speaking of like Solana and some of these like monolithic L1s, I think that they've used this word integrated in the past to kind of symbolize what they're doing, if you will. So like, how are you guys thinking about like this idea of like kind of being either some confusion of monolithic or just kind of redefining this idea into kind of the vision which you have?
Yeah, so from our side, I think what we see is like obviously Solana took integrated first. We had Modular, which is Celestia first. The people calling their chains Modular before Celestia, but Celestia kind of took it and made it a huge campaign. Similarly, I think like Solana is like obviously integrated, and that's like the camp argues that they're integrated. But I think it's still like early in that you can kind of redefine it. For our thesis, we generally believe that integrated blockchains are ones that you will use multiple different things, multiple different providers. If you're simply using your own tech stack, it's not integrated because you're just using yourself. It's a monolithic blockchain because you're designing end to end the stack from execution to settlement to consensus, etc. While the true integrated blockchains use multiple different providers. In the past, I don't think that's been possible because obviously it takes time for things to mature. But now that we have this explosion of infrastructure and different providers working at each layer, you can essentially, what we're trying to do is like get these groups aligned and be like, hey, the best blockchains are ones that use your stack, my stack, their stack, and that's a truly integrated blockchain. So I think over the next 6 months, with redefining what integrated means, seeing all these teams kind of market that all want to work together, that brings an integrated thesis to life.
Welcome aboard on our journey into the singularity. This is the endgame roadmap for Frax and Fractal, the new L2 out of the Frax ecosystem that is totally based on fractal scaling. Fractal is a modular L2 blockchain built by Frax with modular and fractal scaling in mind. Fractal scaling is based on the Mandelbrot set of fractal images, and it explains how L2s become L3s and the entire app chain lifecycle goes through its evolution. The Frax ecosystem is made of some of the top builders in the space and has stemmed from its OG days of the Frax stablecoin. It is now in the LST space, the LRT space, and this Fractal L2 joins the existing suite of Frax products, including Frax Swap and Frax Lend. You can see Frax Ferry, the bridge to go from any chain, Arbitrum, Optimism, or mainnet into the Fractal mainnet, bridge your tokens, and bring your Frax assets into the Fractal ecosystem. Join today to get the best out of Fractal. You are still early. Join today, take part in our expedition into the singularity.
I just want to talk about value accrual real quick, because like in the monolithic sense, value accrual tends to go to like the monopoly or like the monolith. In the modular world, like we've kind of theorized, we've heard from some people during modular March that it ends up at the user level through some tokens. Or at the microservice level ends up recouping that, and then because it's more granular, they can end up passing that back to a more precise community that they're trying to target. So I'm curious, how do you guys reckon, like, when you think about value accrual in the integrated thesis, is it one or is it the other, or is it something totally different where value flows?
Honestly, I think it's just insanely more nuanced. It's not like, does it go to the module or does it go to the monolith? I think certain modules are going to be far more capable of capturing value than others, is like one nuance we can throw in there. And so I think we're going to see like a wide distribution of some layers of this are probably going to be far more commoditized than others. Others will probably have like significant ability to capture value. So I don't think it's as much about like, do all the modules capture this or the users? I think it's like some modules will probably capture asymmetric value compared to other modules that are out there. And it's more about kind of distributing the costs of operating this infrastructure across those different modules. Rushi, what's your take on this?
I think value accrual is a meme. Like it doesn't matter. Like first of all, like there's no real definition of value accrual. Like DA layers make like $100 a week, and there's still like obviously very well funded projects and mindshare and good tokens and whatnot. So like there's two answers. If you're looking at value accrual from like who generates the most amount of fees, and who has more control of the fees, I would say that's probably the execution layer, because like I could wake up tomorrow and make my L2 twice more expensive, for like 5 cents to 10 cents, and users have to deal with that. Whereas DA layers, like if it jack up the fees, I'll just go to the next DA layer. I think the value accrues to those that build the ecosystem, and create sticky effects. So, like if you have like 5 different DA layers, and they all like are competing on like fees, they're always gonna drive each other down, right? But if they have like MOUs and they have a ecosystem and like a culture, the fees markets don't really matter. So the value always accrues to the ecosystem builders. So whether that's a layer 2 level, getting dApps on board, your liquidity providers, etc. For like DA layers and sequencers, you have less of a direct ecosystem. You have more of like a B2B play, but still, it's like who can lock in the best vendors that have the most value. But I think that gets more trickier because like that becomes like, okay, in 6 months I can hop to the next hottest girl, which is like the cheaper DA layer, the faster one, the new well-funded one. While like L2 systems and L1 systems have like their own protocols, their own builders, which are more long-term in theory that stay around for like years.
Okay. Coming back to this kind of integrated, the second pushback here that I think that is relevant. Like, okay, so we have a blockchain which has some parts enshrined. Like I think Movement's a good example here. We can talk about Omni as well. Right? You guys have your own shared sequencer. You guys have your own execution environment. But you'll use a different data availability layer, Celestia, Eigen, Avail, something. And you'll kind of outsource some parts, but enshrine some others. Like what makes Movement like more integrated than something like, or more integrated or less modular, or kind of like where's the line in the sand versus something like a Manta, who is just like a general purpose L2 that uses zkVM or currently OP Stack, eventually zkVM, I've heard, but uses Celestia for DA, where they're like a modular L2.
Yeah, so I think you have like the Venn diagram, right? You have like modular, or you have like monolithic, and then modular, and then you have like this overlap. So like the monolithic crowd is like the Sona's, the Monads, the Aptos and Suites that end-to-end develop their own stack, not using really any of the providers. You have the modular crowd, which is pretty much like focused on one layer of the stack. So Celestia, Espresso, etc. They're focused on like sequencing only, DA only. And you have like this weird Venn diagram where it's like, okay, what do you call like the Mantas and the movements and like the Omnis of the world? They're using different parts of the stack, but trying to bring their own use case to market. So I think like the more experimentation you have, the more integrated you are. So like for us, we have so many different moving pieces, and we're trying to combine things. While as like a traditional conduit L2 on Celestia, I wouldn't argue is very integrated. I would still put it in the integrated bubble, but they probably wouldn't claim the title as much. Similar to like how like IND is kind of modular, but they're not really pushing forward the narrative per se. But yeah, in your example, Manta, like they're more of an OP stack L2 on Celestia. They're not bringing like their novel execution layer. They're not essentially experimenting pretty much on any layer of the stack really. We're really focused on a completely new VM, a completely new sequencer. So I would argue that's more integrated. But still, like if you're using any VM on Celestia, you're combining like Manta has ZK EVM. I'm not too familiar with them, but if you combine the ZK EVM with Celestia, I would say that's integrated because that's two novel technologies you're bringing together.
Yeah, I think they're eventually getting there. I think they're still just OP Stack, but okay. So basically, the thesis here is like the very use case specific chains and kind of like teams. Those are like extremely modular,
Yep.
in the sense that they just focus on one part of the stack. But then, basically, the idea here is that if you put these different parts of the stack together, then like you said, like a modular plus a modular becomes an integrated stack or an integrated chain.
The question is like, what do you call it? Like an alt VM? I hate the word, but alt VM or alt DA.
Yeah, Alt VM L2. Yeah, right.
Instead of calling it Frankenstein.
Which we think is like, yeah, like we think that's the best path forward for like roll ups, something like Movement, new VM, use an Alt DA, use some sort of shared sequencer. That's like so many miles ahead of like a traditional ETH roll up.
Yeah, I think one way to conceptualize this is historically people have tried to create all L1s, and they've made various trade-offs, but they had to build this like whole stack and run this entire stack, and that takes so much effort to roll that all out. Whereas a more like modular integrated, if we're looking at what an integrated chain could be, so Omni is like an integrated chain, for example, but it's not an all L1. Like, it's not trying to compete with Ethereum at all. It actually complements the Ethereum infrastructure stack. So I think it also enables people to build more like cooperative, synergistic technologies than just trying to compete over being like the L1 that people use. And I think we've seen an innovation cycle where there was about 4 to 5 years where people really competed on just trying to be that execution layer as an L1 itself. But now what we're able to do is we're able to build chains themselves that specifically augment other chains like Ethereum, and L2 environments where we can experiment with different virtual machines. So that, I think it's almost, if we zoom out, it's a more productive way for us all to like work together as an industry to improve the technology stack.
The conclusion I'm coming to is that integrated is all of these modular components without the fragmentation problem.
Yep,
Like,
that's the thesis.
That's the goal. Yeah. I mean, like, piece them all together in a way that isn't chaos, because we're in chaos world right now where it's like super difficult to hop around and use these different things. So it should be abstracted.
Yeah, I mean, if you guys go check the ecosystem chart that you guys posted, right, it was like different DA layers, different execution layers, different provers, and it's like 100 teams. And as a user, I'm just like, what the hell does this mean? Like, I'm not actually going to use a DA layer. I'm not going to actually use a proving network. These are things that are supposed to be in the back end. But you need teams like Movement and Omni to actually build a technology that people are using every day. Like, the thesis is you want to use a DEX that has Celestia under the hood, the shared sequencing, alt VM. Like, that's what we're really optimizing for, right? And you kind of need this ecosystem of L1s and L2s that are building ecosystems of applications, builders, etc. They're actually using that ecosystem, say ecosystem 5 times, but using that, like all the providers that you guys listed. That hasn't really happened yet. It's pretty fragmented. It's like, I'm just going to build a DA layer and no one's going to use it, and we'll launch a token and call it a day. But then what happens after that? How do you actually get the transactions? How do you actually build blocks that are useful?
I think as well, just thinking about all these like different components that we're scaling out here, like ultimately there's this other meme of chain abstraction right now, right? And I really think that the like conclusion of the integrated thesis is implicitly chain abstraction. Like, users will not think beneath a certain level of the stack, and that is a good thing because it'll make it infinitely easier to use these different things. So from my perspective, at least, like an implicit theme of integrated design at large is chain abstraction, because really that just means like make the users not think about the infrastructure.
Awesome. You said exactly what I was thinking just now. Like, we had the modular push, all of these lazy projects that were really, really hyper specialized on one part of the stack, which was really important, really necessary. Now we get this integrated push, which is coming at it from the other angle, where we don't want the fragmentation problem of all these little tiny microservices operating in a silo. And now what do we have? We have this chain abstraction push, which is trying to integrate all of those modular parts. And they're calling it orchestration, and they're calling it chain abstraction, and they're calling it like the composability layer, orchestration, whatever it is that they're calling it. But ultimately, they're all trying to push the modular components into an integrated bundle or an integrated like stack. And so, do you guys tend to like kind of see this phenomenon? How do you see this playing out? Do you see modular components ultimately getting integrated by these chain abstraction protocols? What does that end state look like? Cartesi is your home for app-specific rollups. At the forefront of developing new tools and platforms that enhance the capabilities of blockchain technology, Cartesi enables applications that are flexible and built to scale. Build on a full Linux environment and use traditional software libraries, but in blockchain development. Go to cartesi.io, that's cartesi.io, to learn more about building your own app chain today.
I mean, I would say it's more infrastructure abstraction for what we're doing. Like, again, like the average user doesn't want to use a DA layer. The average user doesn't want to use a sequencer. They just want to trade meme coins in a DEX. So we're trying to optimize for the best DEX meme coin trading experience. So in that regard, it's like abstracting the infrastructure. We're making sure that you don't need to use it, you don't even know it's dealer, you don't even know what a sequencer is. You're just simply having the best user experience on Ethereum. So from like a layer 2 point of view, and what we're trying to build is infrastructure abstraction, where I guess like you can say it's chain abstraction too, because Celestia is a chain, and then like Espresso is gonna launch a chain and stuff like that. So like I would say from our angle is chain abstraction, but more focused on infrastructure, where all the underlying lazy parts are abstracted away, so you don't need to even know about that. But I think Austin's and Omni's approach is more directly chain abstraction.
Yeah. I mean, I think framing it as infrastructure abstraction is like slightly more precise. Even though a lot of these things really are chains, like depending, independent of what they call themselves. It is about abstracting this all away from end users. And I think the conclusion of this will be super exciting in the sense that we'll have chains that will be free to use for end users, where you will just have like native account abstraction. You can sign in with email and you'll be able to use it like you will any other website. And you won't even really necessarily need to know it's crypto behind the scenes, but you will be getting those like composability properties out of it. So I'm super excited for where we actually go with this. I think it's about far more than just making it so that users don't have to think about which rollup they're on. I think it's about empowering users with experiences that like fundamentally we have not been able to create previously in crypto. And I specifically think this is very important because obviously crypto is a very like there's a ton of gambling in crypto right now. Most of our most widely used applications are very speculation based. But I think fundamentally that comes from the fact that we force people to buy a volatile asset and then send it to these networks in order to participate in these things. And I think that puts people in like kind of a more degen mindset. I think as we move into a world where we have just like natively zero gas applications, you don't need to think about a seed phrase or anything. We'll have like a much wider array of applications that people can build. And this has been something that people have been complaining about for the past like year or two. Like, where are the applications? Where are the applications? Like, we make people like buy a highly volatile asset and then send it to a network before they can do anything. Like, it's very difficult to create exciting applications when that is the first onboarding step. And I think we're going to remove that soon here.
And just want to give you a chance to talk about Octane as well. You guys just pushed that out. Curious to kind of to understand like why you guys are working towards what this concept of Octane brings and kind of what that will enable Omni to do as well for this kind of modular integrated world that we're getting into.
Yeah. So for anybody who's not familiar, Omni is a chain specifically built so that people can build applications across all rollups, and they'll just be able to use access users from everywhere. The way that we achieve this is really three key components. We have an execution layer, we have a consensus layer, and then we have effectively like an aggregation layer of rollups where we can look at state from across all these different rollups. The kind of aggregation layer is some more custom Omni specific stuff that we built. But the way that we designed the key chain here that has like execution and consensus is through combining the engine API with ABCI 2.0. And so this is the first time that we're able to take like standard Ethereum execution clients and maybe more frontier ones like Reth that are coming out and then pair it with like high performance consensus algorithm. So what this gives us is an EVM chain that has extremely fast finality. This is a very generally useful thing. The industry has been trying to get the output of something like this for many years. And yeah, we're just like super pro open source. So we designed this architecture for our chain and we received a ton of inbound from other teams that were interested in using this. And so, yeah, we open sourced it and we think, it's something that many other teams are already developing on, but doing very different things with. It's very helpful to have just this base integrated frame chain work or integrated chain framework for other people to build their specific use cases on. So yeah, I mean, honestly, I was pretty surprised teams would reach out and like, hey, can you help me figure out how to like config this pre-deploy? And I just had no idea they were playing around with this framework at large. So yeah, very excited for where this will go because it's just like a really nice high performance chain out of the box, and then people can tack on their specific use case on top of it.
So first EVM on Cosmos.
No. It's so, I mean, the cool thing here is like you can use consensus algos from Cosmos, but you can also use like Narwhal Bullshark, for example. You can plug that in as long as it's using ABCI 2.0. And then you can pair it. You could use a MoveVM with it if it complied to the engine API, but we use an EVM. So at large, it's about taking high performance consensus algos with the ideal execution environment that you want.
Rushi, let me take this one. Why are you using an EVM and not the MoveVM?
because specifically for us, it could make sense for somebody to use a Move VM with this for their use case. For us, specifically, we're targeting people being able to build across the entire Ethereum rollup ecosystem. And a vast majority of people use the EVM today. So it's much easier to have this kind of global state layer operating as an EVM. But you could have really cool transpilation interfaces so that you could build and move and propagate it to other EVM environments as well.
Fortunately, we're EVM compatible, so I'm good with that too.
But you did say global state layer, which is something that Andy and I have been playing around with, like ideologically here for a little bit. What's your, we've seen this from like the intents framework, like trying to build like a global intent mempool. Other people are just trying to do it at the shared sequencer layer and combine all of these like the blockchain states from all these rollups. Generally, like what is your approach to this global state layer, and what does that look like in practice?
Yeah, so that's basically what Omni is. The nuance here is that it's not all the state from everywhere all the time. It's specifically what developers choose to put there. So you can imagine something like a lending protocol where your lending protocol could accept deposits from across all these different domains, and you can kind of do global accounting at the Omni layer. You don't necessarily need to like bridge tokens there. As long as you have a view into what's going on across all these different domains, you can like have an application that remains solvent and has whatever properties that you're looking for. And so our perspective there is just like effectively give developers a place to put global state, but not put so much burden on it that it has to have like all roll-up state from everywhere. It's more just like precisely, okay, what like variables do we want to store in this global state layer? And we do that like TLDR. We use restaking to secure the like state sourcing across all these different rollups. And that's kind of the Omni specific component built on top of Octane.
Amazing. Rushi, got one for you here, sir, and then we'll wrap up a little bit less spicy. Actually, I'm going to save my spicy one for after. The community has a question for you, but the first question that I have more technically is, when you guys enshrine things like your shared sequencer is kind of like the main thing that I think of Movement kind of opting to enshrine versus kind of using like Espresso or Astria or one of these others. Like, what benefits do you get from like having that kind of in-house rather than outsourcing, from like risk level, from security, interoperability, these types of things?
I've talked multiple times to you guys about this, but I was always bearish B2B shared sequencers, because ultimately, like, if I'm joining a network, the main thing I want is go-to-market support. Like, if I'm a L2 or like, let's say I'm like RWA L2 or I'm a gaming L2, I want to tap into like an Optimism superchain, like Arbitrum Orbit, because there's liquidity, there's users, there's builders, there's mind share. I'll get co-cheated by the Arbitrum page. Like, these things are actually important for protocols that are looking to build their own brand. Whereas things like, especially with great tech, probably better share sequencer than us, I would admit, and because they spent the last like 3 years focusing on that. But like, they don't have their own ecosystem. Like, you don't get anything from a B2B point of view from joining existing shared sequencer. I'm probably gonna yell at for saying this, but like, for us, it's like Optimism and Arbitrum. When you have existing layer 2 that has TVL, has users, has this mindshare, has a network of rollups, you're joining like a family where they'll be pushed together by this entire ecosystem from a go-to-market point of view, as well as the tech, obviously great, right? Like, the huge value prop and the main value prop of shared sequencers is cross rollup transactions, accessing liquidity across different chains. For existing B2B shared sequencers, there is no liquidity to access. There's no current chains live. So this doesn't make sense for them to even have, like, if I'm an L2, it doesn't make sense for me today to opt into using that sequencer. Whereas I can go to like a Movement, go to Optimism and be like, there are already 5 L2s that have all raised capital. There's obviously going to be a lot of liquidity. There's going to be a lot of builders. It makes more sense to go there. So going back to the original point, like, the shared sequencer, like, obviously the tech is great and it's good to use that, but the main reason for opting into it as a builder or using the enshrined shared sequencer is purely go-to-market support. How do I join a network that's going to help me amplify my use case and also get the liquidity that a shared sequencer optimizes for? Whereas like traditional B2B options, there's no real value capture that's present.
Once these shared sequencers get, let's say like, when, right, soon, TM, but like when they have an ecosystem of 10 rollups that they're working with, 20 rollups, then wouldn't you then be able to tap in? But you're saying for the current state, this is how it is now.
I mean, if they manage to get the rollups and Godspeed, like, then that's a great ecosystem to go join. But today, as far as I know, the major L2s in the world aren't on these existing B2B shared sequencers. they're in the super chain, they're in orbit, and like soon our exchange we announce. So today and for the next 6 months, I don't see any reason.
Yeah. Some move stack coming soon. The community question that I've been fielding is when are we going to be able to use Movement? We see all these applications coming on Twitter, a lot of hype coming from Rushi Manch's Twitter account, but when, sir?
The testnet coming up in the next few weeks. I'm excited for that. And a huge campaign that we're excited to announce. It's going to be one of the bigger L2 campaigns in space.
Awesome, man. Good stuff, guys. Well, thank you guys for coming on and sharing your thoughts. Happy to always chat with you all and keep crushing it, guys.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Austin.
Cheers, guys.